Primal Chaos.
Hey guys, Primal Chaos here. Welcome to the channel. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Enchroma Glasses. Enchroma makes corrective lenses and glasses for people with all kinds of color deficiencies. So if you're colorblind or you know someone who is, check out their website. And if you use the code CHAOS in checkout, CHAOS, you'll get 10% off. Tell them Primal Chaos at you. All right, so sometimes on this channel, part of the journey is going back and sort of fixing or correcting mistakes from my musical journey, which is to say that like going back and finding bands that I should have been all aware of at the time, but somehow sort of missed in my trajectory through my musical upbringing and my formative years particularly. Now, I was there when grunge first hit. I remember seeing Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit on the Music Video Hits, which is the music video Saturday morning show here in Australia. And I remember seeing that video and thinking to myself, oh, this changes everything. You know, I was like 14 or 13, maybe 15 at the time. I'm not sure. But I remember that coming on. I remember seeing the aesthetic of the video, hearing the riffs, hearing the voice, hearing the song, and just thinking, oh, this is a movement, right? And there's no exaggeration. I remember having those thoughts. And so, you know, I liked Nirvana to a degree. Like they were, it was one of those things where back in the old days, you couldn't just get your hands on music. You got the music you could get your hands on. Nowadays, you can just Google anything. You can send songs to your friends if you want to. But back then, if you didn't have a friend who could burn you, tape you the album. We didn't have CD players and stuff back then, or burners at the very least. But you could tape it off a friend, or you could borrow a CD, or you could buy it. But if you didn't have access to the funds to do that, you were stuck with what you had. And so you had to keep your curation of your music collection pretty tight in a lot of cases, unless you sort of came from a family who were into music. A lot of people learned music through older brothers and siblings and things like that. Now, I was a huge Pearl Jam fan. They were the ones that sort of tickled my fancy. I liked Nirvana. I never had, a favorite album or anything. I just liked a lot of songs from Nirvana. Obviously Smells Like Teen Spirit was a big deal, but they were a culture unto themselves. But to me, Pearl Jam, for some reason, really tickled my fancy. Maybe because the guitars and stuff are really inspired by Hendrix and stuff. And at the time I was going through that whole 60s guitar thing like everyone else was. But one band that always escaped me was Alice in Chains. And I think it was because in my circle of friends, nobody really had any of their albums. And I don't know that they ever really toured for us to really get to know about them. Obviously, I remember in all the guitar magazines, Jerry Cantrell was written about all the time. I knew Lane Staley was the singer. Alice in Chains, I've heard this song. I've heard a bunch of their songs, but I've never critically listened to them like an obsessed fan would, right? So in a lot of cases, sometimes it's cool to react to something just simply because you see it through new eyes. When you're critically listening to something as opposed to it just being on the background, or you're listening to it to try and see if you like it. When you're reacting, I'm always trying to find things that are interesting to tell you guys about that I'm hearing, or things I'm experiencing. And so sometimes looking at it through that prism allows you to sort of get a crash course in who that band is and where they come from and what they're about. I know that Lane had a tragic ending, as a lot of people from that generation did. But, I think there's something haunting about that. It's kind of like Brandon Lee dying on the set of The Crow. Yeah, I'm really curious. I know this is one of their bigger songs. And yeah, let's just jump straight in. I'm really interested. Here we go. Alice in Chains, Rooster. Gotta love the 4x3 format.
Never really talked about the war at all. I asked him about it one time.
You got just about. That's the main thing.
I remember we were sitting on the porch drinking beer at night. I think it was summertime or something, and I asked him a question or two.
Sometimes you think, what the hell are we doing here, right? I'm watching my friends die.
And he just said, that's dead. So let it lie. So let it be.
Wow.
It's a weird experience, okay? And it's a sad experience. And I just hope nobody else has to go through it. Yeah.
Veterans, man. They have a lot to tell you about the world. that phaser on the guitar. It makes it just sound really ethereal. Oh, wow. It's just a really nice 3-part harmony. It's really good. All falsetto.
They found a way to kill me yet. Eyes burn with stinging sweat. Seems every path leads me to nowhere. Wife and kids, household pet. Army green was no safe bet. The bullets screamed to me from somewhere. Yeah, they come to snuff the rooster.
Is that Charlie Sheen? Is this from Platoon or?
Yeah, here come the rooster. Yeah,
Oh,
you know he ain't gonna die. No, no, no. You know he ain't gonna
Jesus.
die.
Might have been saying things, I think.
Yeah, they come to snuff the rooster. Ah, yeah. Yeah, here come the rooster. Yeah. You know he ain't gonna die.
I honestly, I didn't know that it was going to have such an intense video.
No, no, no. You know he ain't gonna die.
It's just bristling with allegory, as well as being completely literal as well. I think it's interesting.
Gunman, they spit on me in my homeland. Lawyer sent me pictures of my boy. Got my pills against mosquito death. My buddy's breathing his dying breath. Oh God, please, won't you help me make it through?
Man, wow.
Here they come to snuff the rooster.
similarities here with like Metallica 1 as well. I'm finding just tonally, not musically, but just the concept. Who produced this song? Damn. Wow, that was a journey I did not expect to take today. Okay, one sec. Yeah, I wasn't really ready for that journey. I had no idea what the concept of the song was about prior to watching this. And I'm assuming it's about, you know, on its surface, it's about understanding the sacrifice of war, right? Like, and living with the ramifications of that after the fact. As someone who's the son of a Vietnam veteran, it's a tricky one to navigate because it's interesting. You relate to the stories and you relate to the discussions differently when you're in your 20s, like these guys were. And to where, now I'm like 44 years old, and I think back and I think about my father and his relationship with the world post being in Vietnam. I think he did 2 or 3 tours. And then he was a career army guy after that as well. The thing that's interesting about it is I know that things like this, they're done with the best of intentions. I think the idea is to sort of demonstrate the intensity of war. Because, I mean, obviously, I think they alluded to the fact that maybe Jerry's father was a veteran, right? Because they had a guy with the Cantrell name tag on. And, he's probably had discussions with his father and heard stories, and they've probably tried to base it around that. And they did a pretty good job of illustrating it in a shocking fashion, right? Because it isn't great. It's the reality of it is, Hollywood is really good at trying to say, look at us, we're showing you the terror and the horror of war. But it's like they can't put their hands on that material without in some way kind of glorifying it at the same time. I mean, so many people are like, oh, my favorite movie is Platoon or whatever, all of those Vietnam movies. And it's the same as the video games and things like that. Like, I love Call of Duty as much as the next guy, but it does glorify the situation of war. And I think sometimes you feel like by showing you like some graphic imagery of people with their legs blown off, or, the horrors of the introduction to Saving Private Ryan, for example, right? I think sometimes that movie kind of, for my mind, sort of nailed it a little bit clearer, right? It felt a little bit more real and a little bit more like you sensed the loss a lot more. Whereas sometimes just showing graphic imagery of torture and crying over your buddy's corpse and stuff like that, sometimes it seems a little bit trite in comparison to the gravity of the real situation of what a veteran goes through post-war. And I think they were trying to illustrate that as well by having like the guy, you could see him back home. It was kind of like a deer hunter sort of situation as well, where he was clearly the veteran and he's got his rifle and he was kind of freaking out and feeling like he was still encumbered by the fears of like everything around him, and that post-traumatic stress. It's really interesting that this video came out when it did, because when you think about it, guys like this that are maybe in their 20s, mid-20s, they would have fathers who would be, say, in their 40s, right? And so that trauma of like that post-traumatic stress and stuff would be very real. And so I was in a situation where my father didn't talk about any of that stuff very much until we got much older and finally stories would start coming out. But like by the age of 20, all I knew about war was what I saw in movies and stuff like that, not really from the horse's mouth. Like Dad would say the occasional thing, which would be kind of shocking, but never like, he wouldn't, he always kept it to himself. He kept the pain to himself until eventually it broke him. And, you know, he ended up having a lot of dramas with post-traumatic stress, very serious problems that, you know, I don't know that will ever recover from 100%, but he's a lovely guy, and he's the kind of guy that is there for everybody, whether they need him or not, you know. But, you know, in the case of something like this, I think it's an amazing video. And I think this would have opened a lot of young people's eyes to the traumas of war and things like Vietnam, when in a time in the 90s when we really didn't have one. You know, there was Desert Storm and all that sort of stuff was happening prior to that and things, but it was kind of like this war that we hadn't seen the echoes from that yet, like we were seeing with Vietnam veterans and stuff around that era, where the post-traumatic stress was starting to manifest. And I mean, they called it shell shock and stuff back then, based on like the trench warfares, World War I and II and things like that. But it's the same thing. It's another way of saying PTSD. So, you know, but I mean, I think we've talked enough about the politics of the video. It is what it is. And I think it's probably, as much as I look at it as an elder person with somewhat of a little bit of experience in that stuff, I look at it and go, okay, they did the best they could with what they had. But I think 14 and 15-year-old Corey, that would have really resonated with me as something that I would have maybe related to my father, would have opened my eyes dramatically. So I think it's probably one of those situations of the right place at the right time. It was probably hugely effective. And I know that a lot of people who are probably lifelong Alice in Chains fans are so, because they probably saw this back in the day. You know, it's haunting, it's dark, the video is intense, and it's still kind of pithy. It's got that sort of 90s kind of, you know, cutting from the narrative to just random. Here's a cow's face, and here's like the band member looking morose. And like what I said midway through was that it kind of reminded me a little bit of Metallica's One video, not musically or anything like that, but in the fact that they were trying to take a very serious topic, one that, to be fair, they may not have had a full understanding of, but they just wanted to express their feelings on it. And they made this amazing video that's haunting and dark. And, you know, I mean, if you were a fan of Metallica back in the day, it's one of those ones that was like, it was probably the greatest music video you'd ever seen at that point, right? And I guess if I'd have come across Alice in Chains back then, I might have had the same sensation with this one. But, you know, let's talk about the music. Honestly, Lane's voice is super haunting and really interesting. He has his own, you know, he's got that Seattle kind of thing, inflection there, but he also has this way of getting like that growl in his voice and opening out his throat and getting like that sort of, you know, which sounds amazing. And again, it's super haunting and engaging, and it makes you want to listen, right? As a front person, you can't ask for a better voice than that. And musically, that's why I looked up who produced it, because it sounds massive. I wonder if this is a remaster. I mean, it's the official HD video, so it's obviously been, it's still 4:3, but maybe musically it's been enhanced. But it's kind of the reason I got these headphones. They're really good headphones, but like just the tones on the guitar are just, and the sound stage, like that when that first harmony comes in. If you're listening to this through a really good stereo, where is it? You could just hear it. It's like there's 3 people standing right here singing at you. It's so beautifully spacious and lush. Like the mix is tremendously good. And it's interesting too, because a lot of times the choral vocals will try to pan them to make them sound big, but they're really focused in this case. It sounds like one voice with 3 notes coming out. Musically, what's interesting too is it's particularly towards the start here, it's got that lazy sort of lopiness to it, where the bass is kind of catching up at the start of each bar and things like that. And it's sort of, the drums are kind of laggy and things, and it gives you that come down sensation, you know, of like, you've had that really intense night of adrenaline fueled violence or whatever. And, you know, now all of the painkillers are wearing off and it's the light of morning and you can see like just the chaos and you're going, I've made some choices, you know? It's that next day sort of like morose feeling of just being down, you know? And just to be able to illustrate that musically by making the choice to be super loose is something I don't think a lot of bands would be brave enough to do, to be honest. But then when it, you know, by the end of it, if like you compare this, it's, and also the other thing too, because using effects like phasers and flanges and stuff like that, it sounds psychedelic. So immediately it takes you back to like 1969, you know? I mean, this sounds like something that somebody would be listening to on a helicopter going, you know, back to Da Nang, you know? You hear that? Like the bass is like just, it's doing that ding, ding, back up to the root right at the last moment. So it feels like it's late. And then again, the chorus, they just left so much room to just hit those guitars. And I'm hearing at least 4 guitar tracks in each ear, like, or at least two in each ear. Yeah, it just sounds massive. And there's a wah there again, very 60s centric sound. Look, it's a masterpiece of just 90s homage to the 60s. Because you got to remember, a lot of grunge sort of was blues rock sort of stuff. Like it came from the Hendrixes of the world and Cream and bands like that. Eric Clapton was a huge influence as well in the 90s. You know, it's just one of those things where like, it seemed like the last thing that mattered was the 60s when you were in the 90s. The 80s we all tried to forget because it was just opulence and drugs and it was all just like really, what's the word? It was the material girl era, right? It was all about status and money and greed is good and Wall Street. And when you landed in the 90s as someone in their formative years, it just felt like that was it was just so meaningless. And so that we would look back to the 60s and flower power and hippie movement and things like that, but with that Generation X kind of black cloud, and that's how you get grunge, right? I think I just solved it. That's how grunge happened. It was the hippie movement fed through the prism of Generation X's black cloud of misery and the sensation of having no purpose. That's it. And so that's how you get this. And so you can see, like, to them, the most important thing to sing songs about is something that happened in the 60s. It's not what happened last week. That to them felt like it had weight and energy and truth and honesty and value, right? Those parables of the dramas of the past. Anything that happened in the 80s or the early 90s, like 89, was probably too soon to really have a historical significance. Yeah. Wow. Look, this one's really thrown me for a 6. I'm trying to keep my videos under like 12 to 15 minutes, and I'm at 24, 25 minutes now. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. It was interesting. Let me know in the comments how this song touched you. Like, what was it about this song? Was it just Alice in Chains in general, like the mystique of Alice in Chains? Was it this song in particular? Was it the music video? Hit me up. I'm really curious to hear. And particularly if you've never heard Alice in Chains before and you're taking this journey with me, I'd love to hear from you as well. That'd be amazing. Yeah, but that's basically it. If you feel like I brightened your day at all, you can support the channel just by buying me a coffee. I'll leave a link in the description, and just hit the thanks button underneath the video. That's an even easier way to support the channel. But that's basically it. Look, this one, this was a tough one because, you know, I've got so many mixed feelings about the way the Vietnam War is portrayed and things like that in media. I think I don't judge these guys for what they did. I think they did a really good job of probably educating, if at the very least, educating a young early 90s grunge mob of teenagers about the dark side of war and the ramifications that are still being felt from it at that point years later. But you know what? The music was just, it's so well produced. As a band, they just have so much soul in their sound. And I wasn't expecting to be this engaged with Alice in Chains. I feel like I've missed it for the last 30 years of my life. But anyway, thanks again, guys. Thanks for sticking around. I'll catch you on the next one. Hey guys, this video is made possible by Enchroma. 1 in 6 guys and 1 in 200 women are colorblind, and if that happens to be you, there's something you can do about it. Click the link in the description, it'll take you to Enchroma's website where you can get a free eye test, and while you're there, maybe pick up some corrective lenses. They've got styles to suit everybody and a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you got really nothing to lose. And while you're there, use the code CHAOS in checkout to get 10% off. Tell them Primal Chaos sent you.